Okay, let's talk about Sansa 1. I have so much to say about Sansa and this Sansa chapter and the Sansa story in general that I'm fearful I'm going to miss explaining everything, and because it's so complicated, I'm gonna get tongue tied and everything. But there's so much to say about Sansa, and Sansa Stark and her place in the story. Now keep in mind, here we are. Um, it is around November of 1991 or 1993. I'm sorry, and George R. R. Martin has finished his. He has his failed pilot, Doorways, that he's finished. And prior to writing Doorways, he had 13 chapters, 13 or 14 chapters that were finished. And I say 13 or 14 because when G. Steph went to the Cushing Library, he found that the November 1993 file had 14 chapters in it, but when George wrote his outline to his editor in October, a month earlier, he had 13 chapters. It's hard to say which was the chapter that was not included. Maybe Daenerys 2, because it's out from the rest, or maybe it could be like Catelyn 3 or something like that. It's hard to say, because Catelyn 3 it's very different in tone, and it's very action oriented and dry, and is the beginning of a Catelyn story rather than everything kind of settling. It's a weird place to stop, like Catelyn about to go out on her adventure. So it's hard to say which was the chapter that was the difference between the 13 and the 14 around this period of time. But keep in mind, Sansa was not a point of view. Sansa was not a point of view for years. He did not. And when you read George's outline for the series that he hands into his editor in October of 1993, Sansa is a minor character. He specifically says that the main 5 characters that were going to survive the whole story are Jon, Arya, Tyrion, Dany, Jon, Arya, Tyrion, Dany, and Bran. Okay, and then the 2 that are listed to die, Catelyn and Eddard, are there, and that's 7. And there's 8 point of views in A Game of Thrones. Sansa is the 8th. So at some point around this time, George decides to make Sansa a point of view character. And it's interesting that he does, because the Sansa chapters are not completely necessary in the beginning of A Game of Thrones. She becomes necessary later as a point of view for King's Landing. But keep in mind, here she's at Derry, and Arya is largely a character in this chapter. It could have been an Arya chapter. And later, Sansa 2, she's at the Hand of the King tourney, which could have been an Eddard or an Arya chapter as well. It's only after Ned is captured and Arya goes missing that Sansa is even needed as a point of view. And there's ways that, George probably could have gotten around that anyway. So at some point, he decides that Sansa is going to grow. And it's fascinating also to see where Sansa is in the story now, like at Feast for Crows, and how fascinating she's become in The Winds of Winter sample chapter, compared to the character that I think a lot of fans kind of hate in A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, the first half of A Storm of Swords, where they say, oh, Sansa's annoying and she doesn't do anything. Well, you're not supposed to like Sansa. That's the whole point of Sansa. But what I find fascinating about Sansa is that people don't like her, but people don't like her for the same naive reasons that some people like. Sansa is a fangirl for the fantasy genre. And so it's weird that people hate her, considering that she is the one that believes in rightful kings and true knights and honor and chivalry and all of that, the classic fantasy stuff. Like Sansa is put there as this caricature to expose how lame and wrong the fantasy genre is that George is subverting, you know? And, you know, I really love where George takes the Sansa character through his natural evolution. In his original outline, she's simply a villain. She's simply a character that was going to team up with the Lannisters. I can show you the original outline and what George says about her. Let's see here. Okay. 5 central characters will make it through all 3 volumes. And then he says, each of the contending families will learn it has a member of dubious loyalty in its midst. Sansa Stark, wed to Joffrey Baratheon, will bear him a son, the heir to the throne. And when the crunch comes, she will choose her husband and child over her parents and siblings. A choice she will later bitterly rue. Tyrion Lannister, meanwhile, will befriend both Sansa and her sister Arya while growing more and more disenchanted with his own family. And yeah, there's a kind of a lame betrayal at the end with Sansa that kind of no one holds against her, like her it's interesting in the show, they make it a big deal, and fans were kind of scratching their head, like, wouldn't everyone understand like Sansa's position? Like, why is Arya being so mean to her? But, kind of straight from the outline, like this betrayal of Ned, like, giving information and going public and saying that he was a traitor is seen as this negative thing. But it's clearly in the original outline, it was more like she marries Joffrey. She has a kid with Joffrey. And so it's going to be a kind of a classic, more classic. She's going to become more of a classic villain. Arya, meanwhile, is going to go north of the Wall with the rest of the Stark family in the outline. Catelyn and the Stark children all go north of the Wall, presumably learning wildling ways or whatever, and then, and battling. Anyway, Sansa, interestingly, in the outline, Sansa is presented as a mirror to Tyrion, as in Tyrion is the Lannister that goes Stark, and Sansa is the Stark that goes Lannister. But what we get in the final printed product that George has put in the book, Sansa is much more a mirror to Arya. The two characters quite overtly representing different aspects of femininity. Arya being the gender-bending tomboy whose direwolf is named Nymeria after a feminist queen, and Sansa who is the traditional takes on the traditional feminine role and has a direwolf named Lady. And so we'll get into this, because keep in mind that when this chapter was written, George was thinking that Sansa was going to be more of a regular villain, that she was going to side with Joffrey and Cersei, and only later, would she go against that. And keep in mind, it sounds like originally a Game of Thrones was going to take place over a much longer period of time than the sort of 9 month to 1 year period that it does. I mean, she's going to bear a child and things like this, get married and bear a child. So yeah, let's, now keep in mind, people hate, again, Sansa is so naive and into the whole knights and chivalry thing that people hate her. But of course, like, so many fans of Ice and Fire were reading the story and being like, oh, Jon Snow is the rightful king, and Jon Snow is going to like save the world. As if any of that matters. Like keep like the whole thing about the Sansa story, and later what the Sansa story like branches into. The Sansa story branches into the Jaime Brienne story. Not only in the plot, but thematically. Like when you do a search for things like True Knight and see where the term True Knight hops up, and it's quite clear like what George is saying with those stories. The people searching for Sansa are going around with the same themes as Sansa herself. But people really hate her because she's so naive and dumb. But of course, like, buying into the whole knightly honor thing is what George R. R. Martin is saying is dumb in the first place. And so, like, a hatred of Sansa is really like, it's a hatred of our oneself for buying into the notions of knightly honor. And probably have more to say, but I'm tongue tied because there's so much. I would say the some of the greatest themes of the story come from the Sansa story on what George is trying to say about the fantasy genre and honor and morality in general. And the fact that, like, Sansa was initially not even a point of view and was probably just going to be a minor character villain attached to the Lannisters, and she becomes so much more. It goes to show, like, George's gardening system can produce some great stuff, because his outline was like, who cares? Anyway, Eddard Stark had left before dawn, Septim Mordain informed Sansa as they broke their fast. The king sent for him. Another hunt, I do believe. There's still wild aurochs in the lands, I'm told. Now keep in mind, the role of Eddard Stark is, Eddard is the protector, in the sense that the patriarch kind of character. And what happens when you remove that patriarch character from the story? Like, what happens to these girls whose power and agency derive from Ned? Ned's not there. So what happens to them? And this is a major theme. Like, this is why Ned needs to die at the end of Game of Thrones, because it's about what Sansa and Arya do once they're, liberated from Ned, liberated for lack of a better term. Something that happens simultaneous with Dany being liberated from Khal Drogo. What happens when women need to make choices for themselves. But anyway, the idea is that Ned's gone. So what happens? I've never seen an aurochs, Sansa said, feeding a piece of bacon to Lady under the table. The direwolf took it from her hand, as delicate as a queen. And that's the thing. This direwolf, something that, like, fundamentally is not gentle and ladylike. And she's, I would say in this situation that Sansa is delusional. Okay. That somehow this direwolf is going to be delicate as a queen, ladylike. What Sansa is projecting onto the direwolf is as ridiculous as honorable knights and gallant princes and all of the things that Sansa believes in. Septim Mordain sniffed in disapproval. A noble lady does not feed dogs at her table. Right there, she's being told, like, how noble ladies act and what she ought to be doing. Traditional roles, she said, breaking off another piece of comb and letting the honey drip down onto her bread. She's not a dog. She's a direwolf, Sansa pointed out as Lady licked her fingers with a rough tongue. Anyway, father said we could keep them with us if we want. The Septa was not appeased. You're a good girl, Sansa, but I do vow, when it comes to that creature, you're as willful as your sister Arya. She scowled. And where is Arya this morning? Again, this is just straight up, like, now Sansa and Arya are mirrored. Like, we have the two paths of femininity here. She wasn't hungry, Sansa said, knowing full well her sister had probably stolen down to the kitchen hours ago and wheeled a breakfast out of some cook's boy. This kind of shows that wheeled a breakfast. That's like going down and complimenting somebody and trying to get something through them through conversation. It's actually not something we really associate with Arya, but like Arya being good at making friends. She makes friends with these cook boys and Micah off screen, off page. Later, we see Arya does make friends, but she's a jerk, right? But somehow she makes these friends. Do remind her to dress nicely today. Gray velvet, perhaps. We're all invited to ride with the Queen and Princess Myrcella in the royal wheelhouse, and we must look our best. Again, appearances, physical appearances are important for women. Sansa already looked her best. She had brushed out her long auburn hair until it shone and picked her nicest blue silks. She had been looking forward to today more than a week. For more than a week. It was a great honor to ride with the Queen, and besides, Prince Joffrey might be there, her betrothed. Just thinking, it made her feel a strange fluttering inside. This fluttering inside comes back a lot. The butterflies or the bats in her belly. But again, we're focusing on how do women have agency in this traditional world? Well, by looking good, by being pretty. And so Sansa is taking this path. Even though they were not to marry for years and years, Sansa did not really know Joffrey yet, but she was already in love with him. There's the first piece of delusion again. She doesn't know him, but she's in love with him. She's in love with him because he's handsome and he's a prince, right? This is the kind of concept. That's not really who Joffrey is at all. But when people have these notions of kings and everything in their head. Now, keep in mind, this is all also a statement, not just about sex and gender, but it's also the statement about feudalism. When you support the system of princes being regal, kings being rightful, knights being chivalrous, knights being essentially bodyguards that are told that defending the upper class is honorable. You're tacitly approving of the entire social order here. So this is what George is just criticizing massively, which, we've got through the Night's Watch mainly when we were talking about this originally. He was all she ever dreamt her prince should be. Tall and handsome and strong, with hair like gold. That's all her prince needed to be, right? He's good because he's handsome. He's good because he's physically good looking. Even as late as the Sansa, the Elaine sample chapter from The Winds of Winter, she deals with this situation again. She has all of the negative things about Harry the Heir, but he has nice dimples, She treasured every chance to spend time with him, few as they were. The only thing that scared her about today was Arya. Arya had a way of ruining everything. You knew what she would do. I'll tell her, Sansa said uncertainly. She'll dress the way she always does. She hoped it wouldn't be too embarrassing. May I be excused? You may. Septim Ordain helped herself to more bread and honey, and Sansa slid from the bench. Lady followed at her heels, and she ran from the inn's common room. Outside, she stood for a moment amidst the shouts and curses and creaks of wooden wheels as the men broke down the tents and pavilions and loaded the wagons onto another day's march. The inn was a sprawling 3-story structure of pale stone, the biggest that Sansa had ever seen, but even so, it had accommodations for less than a third of the king's party, which had swollen to more than 400 with the addition of her father's household and free riders who had joined them on the road. She found Arya on the banks of the Trident, trying to hold Nymeria still while she brushed dried mud from her fur. The direwolf was not enjoying the process. Arya was wearing the same riding leathers she'd worn yesterday and the day before. And again, contrast of Sansa to Arya. You better put something on. You better put on something pretty, Sansa told her. Septim Ordain said so. We're traveling in the Queen's wheelhouse with Princess Myrcella today. I'm not, Arya said, trying to brush a tangle of Nymeria's matted gray fur. Mike and I are going to ride upstream and look for rubies at the ford. Rubies, Sansa said, lost. What rubies? Arya gave her a look that like she was stupid. Rhaegar's rubies, where King Robert killed him and won the crown. I was just being like, why is she riding upstream for rubies at the ford? Wouldn't the rubies be down? I don't know. We'll see where I don't know where Rhaegar fought. Maybe he or they're going upstream to the ford. Maybe they're going upstream to the ford for the rubies. Okay. Um, you can't look for rubies. The princess is expecting us. The queen invited us both. I don't care, Arya said. The wheelhouse doesn't even have windows. You can't see a thing. What could you want to see? Sansa said, annoyed. She'd been thrilled by the invitation, and her stupid sister was going to ruin everything, just as she feared. Again, this is like she's riding with a queen and a princess, so this is a big deal for her, you know. She likes Queen Cersei and she likes Princess Myrcella, even though she barely knows Myrcella and doesn't know Queen Cersei at all. It's all just fields and farms and holdfasts. It's not, Arya said stubbornly. If you came with us sometime, you'd see. I hate riding, Sansa said fervently. All it does is get you soiled and dusty and sore. Arya shrugged. Hold still, she snapped at Nymeria. I'm not hurting you. Then to Sansa, she said, when we were crossing the neck, I counted 36 flowers I never saw before, and Micah showed me a lizard lion. And so this is, you know, just showing that Arya is adventurous and curious, and Sansa just does not care. Like, she does not care. She has her imaginary, safe, traditional world. And everything that Arya is doing is new and adventurous and, you know, exploring, but that kind of thing. Oh yeah, and Micah showed me a lizard lion. A lizard lion is just a crocodile or an alligator that one would find in a swampy area like the Neck. They are. I think George uses lizard lion in Tough Voyaging originally. That's just like the first time he did it, but he has it here, a lizard lion. Sansa shuddered. They had been 12 days crossing the Neck, rumbling down a crooked causeway through an endless black bog, and she had hated every moment of it. The air had been damp and clammy, the causeway so narrow that they could not make proper camp at night. They had to stop right on the King's Road. It's interesting that the bottle aspect of the Neck is so very important at this point, that George is already thinking about battle and you know, Robb and everything at this point, on how he's going to lose the war and why the North is so defensible and things like this. Dense thickets of half-drowned trees pressed close around them, branches dripping with curtains of pale fungus. George loves writing about fungus on stuff. It appears a lot in his writing. Huge flowers bloomed in the mud and floated on pools of stagnant water. But if you were stupid enough to leave the causeway to pluck them, there were quicksands waiting to suck you down, and snakes watching from the trees, and lizard lions floating half submerged in the water like black logs with eyes and teeth. So again, yeah, this is all going to come in later. So he's already thinking about you know, that the Neck is very hard to travel through. It can only go through this one causeway, none of which stopped Arya, of course. One day she came back grinning, her horsey grin, her hair all tangled and her clothes covered in mud, clutching a raggedy bunch of purple and green flowers for father. Sansa kept hoping he would tell Arya to behave herself and act like the highborn lady she was supposed to be, but he never did. He only hugged her and thanked her for the flowers. That just made her worse. Yeah, and so here we see that, you know, getting into the idea that Ned does not, even though everybody thinks Ned is part of this system, he doesn't seem to actually value the traditional system that much. I mean, in certain respects, I suppose, like getting angry at Jaime for killing the king, but at the same time, he doesn't seem to understand or care about the gender dynamic. And later we find that he, you know, willingly puts Arya in sword fighting lessons. So then it turned out the purple flowers were called poison kisses. Oh, by the way, I mean, getting into this is the whole thing about, like, you know, if Ned doesn't really care about traditional females and their roles in that sense, like, is that what intrigues him about, say, Ashara Dane and in the more feminist Dorne? Then it turned out the purple flowers were called poison kisses, and Arya got a rash on her arms. Sansa would have thought that might have taught her a lesson, but Arya laughed about it. And the next day, she rubbed mud all over her arms like some ignorant bog woman just because her friend Micah told her it would stop the itching. And so, it's the wisdom of the average people, the regular people. She had bruises on her arms and shoulders too, dark purple welts and faded green yellow splotches. Sansa had seen them when her sister undressed for sleep. How she had gotten those only the seven gods knew. And so now we know that the bruises on her arms and shoulders are from Micah. Really, the deepness of Arya's friendship with Micah that she's been making over the past few weeks, because this is a long trip and she's spending all day with Micah. And so it really does get into, Arya's eventual hatred for the Hound and things like this. Micah is such a bit character to us, but really, if you step back and say, oh, wow, Arya was actually spending every day with Micah for weeks, and he was teaching her how to fight and teaching her about flowers and all sorts of things, and having adventures with her, and teaching her about, everything. So it's, when Micah dies, it's understandable how much it affects Arya. But it's funny because when you think of Arya's friends and who she should attach to, yes, Micah's there, but because he's a bit player for us, we don't think about him too much. But she spends a lot of time with him, essentially only him, for weeks. Arya was still going on, brushing out Numeria's tangles and chattering about things she'd seen on her trek south. Last week, we found this haunted watchtower, and the day before, we chased a herd of wild horses. This is the we. The we is her and Micah. You should have seen them run when they caught a scent of Nymeria. The wolf wriggled in her grasp, and Arya scolded her. Stop that. I have to do the other side. You're all muddy. You're not supposed to leave the columns, Sansa reminded her. Father said so. Arya shrugged. I didn't go far. Anyway, Nymeria was with me the whole time. I don't always go off either. Sometimes it's fun just to ride along the wagons and talk to people. Sansa knew all about the sorts of people Arya liked to talk to. Squires and grooms and serving girls, old men and naked children, rough-spoken free riders of uncertain birth. And so now George is again getting this back into the class warfare idea of the common folk versus the noble born, something that's again, it becomes less and less part of the story as things go on. But again, in this early story, where we hear so much about the small folk and the how forgotten about they are, and how they're suffering under this traditional feudal structure, and now it's being brought in with the tradition with it's being conflated and mixed with the ideas about sex and gender and all of this. So, it's amazing how, especially in these early chapters, how much George really just was criticizing the entire fantasy genre of kings and queens and princes and princesses and honor and chivalry and knights and all of this as something that's supporting the this unjust system, and yet we think of it so fondly, my king, oh, you're supporting this. I mean, especially saying you think would somebody be like, oh, my dictator, but when it's king and we associate it with chivalry and honor and all of these things that they tricked people into believing in order to support this unjust hierarchy. Arya would have made friends with anybody. Arya was much friendlier back in the day. She then becomes pretty antisocial. This Micah was the worst. Well, I mean, I suppose not. I guess as she's cat of the canals and all of that, and she's going around making friends with I take that back. Arya, in character of cat of the canals, she gets to know everybody in the city, and she's friends with them all. So she does like that, yeah. This Micah was the worst, a butcher's boy, 13 and wild. He slept in the meat wagon and smelled of the slaughtering block. Ugh. Just the sight of him was enough to make Sansa feel sick, but Arya seemed to prefer his company to hers. Sansa was running out of patience now. You have to come with me, she told her sister firmly. You can't refuse the queen. Septim Ordain will expect you. And so this is a kind of a important kind of thing. You can't refuse the queen. Like the social order is there. You're not allowed to go out of the social order. Septim Ordain will expect you. Like everything that Arya is doing, trying to break out of her both her class role and her gender role is just not allowed. It's not allowed by this feudal structure that Sansa reveres. And so, this Micah was the worst. Like Micah is this representation of the small folk, and Sansa hates him. She hates the poor. She hates the poor guy. He's bad because he smells bad, and he's dirty. He's rough spoken, and while Joffrey is good because he's pretty. Arya ignored her, gave her hard yank with the brush. Nymeria growled and swung away, affronted. Come back here. There's going to be lemon cakes and tea, Sansa went on, all adult and reasonable. And that's the thing, is what does the system promise you? What does the system promise the traditional lady? Well, stuff, some lemon cakes, sweetness. Lady brushed her leg. Sansa scratched her ear the way she liked, and Lady sat beside her on the haunches, watching Arya chase Nymeria. Why would you want to ride a smelly old horse and get all sore and sweaty when you can recline on feather pillows and eat cakes with the queen? This is also just, this criticism of wealth itself. Like, does wealth isolate you and give you less freedom? It's these things like, could Bill Gates go and travel to Morocco and walk through a bazaar? No, he clearly can't do that. And so Arya has a certain amount of freedom in that I know that, people say, oh, being rich is better than being poor. Yeah, probably. But at the same time, there is this there is a lack of freedom that wealth does have. She can't, people can't do all the adventures that Arya is having. Sansa feels like she can't do. I don't like the queen, Arya said casually. Sansa sucked in her teeth, shocked that even Arya would say such a thing, but her sister prattled on, heedless. She won't even let me bring Nymeria. She thrust the brush under her belt and stalked her wolf. Nymeria watched her approach warily. Now, on this one thing, I would say Cersei's being reasonable. This is a deadly, deadly direwolf, okay? That they want to bring into their wheelhouse, with her children. Cersei is completely reasonable here. It's just that we see the show, and in the show, they're just they're using these nice dogs, and they're friendly dogs, and everything is fine. But keep in mind, these are monstrous wolves. A royal wheelhouse is no place for a wolf, Sansa said. And Princess Myrcella is afraid of them. You know that. And she should be, okay? Already we've seen that Ghost attacked Tyrion for no reason, okay? They're direwolves, and another one killed the catspaw. They're deadly. They're deadly. And the fact that the fact that Ned is even allowing these kids to have the wolves is ridiculous. And the fact that, she'd be upset that, oh, I can't bring in my deadly wolf that in just a little while is about to maul somebody, Myrcella is a little baby. Arya grabbed Nymeria around the neck, and the moment she pulled out the brush again, the direwolf wriggled free and bounded off. Frustrated, Arya threw down the brush. Bad wolf, she shouted. Sansa couldn't help but smile a little. The kennel master once told her that an animal takes after its master. This gets into, yes, a dog may look to a master and emulate it. But at the same time, I think they're talking about there's a hint of the telepathic connection between the direwolf and the owner, that Arya is wild, so Nymeria is wild, Sansa is proper, and so Lady is proper, though, come on, they're all still direwolves. She gave Lady a quick little hug, and Lady licked her cheek. Sansa giggled. Arya heard and whirled around, glaring. I don't care what you say. I'm going out riding. Her long, horsey face got the stubborn look that meant she was going to do something willful. Again, like ugliness as a sign of evil, beauty as a sign of goodness. I mean, this is like classic Disney stories, right? Gods be true, Arya. Sometimes you act like such a child, Sansa said. I'll go by myself then, and it will ever be so much nicer that way. Lady and I will eat all the lemon cakes and have the best time without you. She turned to walk off, but Arya shouted after her. They won't let you bring Lady either. She was gone before Sansa could think of a reply, chasing Nymeria along the river. Wow, that's true. It's a monster that she's bringing around. Alone and humiliated, Sansa took the long way back to the inn where she knew Septim Mordain would be waiting. Lady padded quietly by her side. She was almost in tears. All she wanted was for the things to be nice and pretty, the way they were in songs. So George is being pretty explicit here. Okay, she wants everything to be like a story, and later, we have the famous line of Littlefinger saying that the life is not a song, but why couldn't Arya be sweet and delicate and kind like Princess Myrcella? She'd have liked a sister like that. Sansa could never understand how two sisters born only 2 years apart could be so different. It would have been much easier if Arya had been a bastard, like their half-brother Jon. She'd even looked like Jon, with the long face and brown hair of the Starks, and nothing of their lady mother in the face and coloring. I mean, it's really quite funny. Even though George R. R. Martin is straight up criticizing, judging people by their looks, like just because you look pretty doesn't mean you're pretty on the inside, right? This is like the clear message here when comparing Joffrey and Micah. Okay. And then he goes and does the weird stuff about characters looking like each other and then acting like each other. Like Jon and Arya are peas in a pod, and they both look the same, and they look like Ned. If you have the coloring of if you have the look of Catelyn, you're going to act like Catelyn. And when Catelyn thinks Robb is not acting like her, he looks like the father, and stuff like that. It's funny how George R. R. Martin falls into the same thing, that people look a certain way and then act a certain way. Of course, Tyrion is supposed to be a good character, and even though he's a dwarf and everybody thinks he's a demon and things like this. But I mean, Tyrion becomes rather complicated. But nonetheless, so it goes back and forth on it. People. So I don't know. She's saying that Arya is like Jon because she looks like Jon. And some people even go further and say, they say, oh, you're so much like Lyanna. You even look like Lyanna. And you're like, what? Well, are we supposed to judge a book by its cover, or are we not? And Jon's mother had been common, or so people whispered. That's a weird one. That's because the whispers were about Ashara Dane, who was not common. So are the whispers? Is Sansa hearing a different rumor about Wyla, or So now we're hearing, Wyla, Ashara Dane. Both rumors are going around Winterfell apparently. Once when she was littler, Sansa even asked Mother if perhaps there'd been some mistake. Perhaps the Grumpkins had stolen her real sister, but Mother had only laughed and said no. Arya was her real daughter and Sansa's trueborn sister, blood of their blood. Sansa could not think of why Mother would want to lie about it, so she supposed it to be true. I like how they slip in Trueborn's sister, not just sister, Trueborn's sister. That's an important thing. Not the subtle, very subtle dig at Jon. As she neared the center of camp, her distress was quickly forgotten. A crowd had gathered around the queen's wheelhouse. Sansa heard excited voices buzzing like a hive of bees. The door had been thrown open, she saw, and the queen stood at the top of the wooden steps, smiling down at someone. She heard her saying, "The council does us great honor, my good lords." "What's happening?" she asked a squire she knew. "The council sent riders from King's Landing to escort us the rest of the way," he told her. "An honor guard for the king." Anxious to see Sansa Lady clear a path through the crowd, people moved aside hastily for the direwolf. So this is our first real hint that Lady is, a monstrous direwolf. And so despite like Sansa thinking that she's a beautiful, like kind little wolf, and they make her very pretty and normal in the show, but clearly everybody else is like, oh my God, that's a monstrous direwolf, and they're getting out of the way. Yeah, anyway, the ridiculous, like the people don't realize because Sansa is delusional. She's delusional in this chapter. She's delusional about the queen. She's delusional about Joffrey. She's delusional about Lady. Anyway, when she got closer, she saw two knights kneeling before the queen in honor, so fine and gorgeous that it made her blink. One knight wore an intricate suit of white enameled scales, brilliant as a field of new-fallen snow, with silver chasings and clasps that glittered in the sun. This is Sansa chapters are very into what people are wearing. You always hear about everybody's ensemble. When he removed his helm, Sansa saw that he was an old man with hair as pale as his armor. Yet he seemed strong and graceful for all that. From his shoulders hung the pure white cloak of the Kingsguard. His companion was a man near 20, whose armor was plate of deep forest green. He was He was the most handsome man Sansa had ever set eyes upon, tall and powerfully made, with jet black hair that fell to his shoulders and framed a clean-shaven face and laughing green eyes to match his armor. So here we obviously have Barristan and Renly, who are supposed to represent the most honorable of knights, and she's enamored by their appearance so much that she assumes that they're these wonderful gallant knights. And we as readers are supposed to believe this too, right? That Barristan is the knightliest of knights. And later on down the line, we find some dark things about Barristan, especially like him overthrowing Hisdar after getting manipulated by Skahaz, and him being kind of an idiot, and Renly being having his own secrets. Renly's not a bad guy, but he's certainly self-serving. But so neither guys. I mean, Barristan is supposed to be this paragon of honor, but neither guy is perfect. Cradle under one arm was an antlered helm, its magnificent rack shimmering in gold. At first, Sansa did not notice this third stranger. He did not kneel with the others. He stood to one side beside their horses, a gaunt, grim man who watched the proceedings in silence. His face was pockmarked and beardless, with deep-set eyes and hollow cheeks. Though he was not an old man, only a few wisps of hair remained to him, sprouting above his ears. But those he had grown long as a woman's. His armor was iron gray chainmail over layers of boiled leather, plain and unadorned, and it spoke of age and hard use. Above his right shoulder, the stained leather hilt of the blade strapped to his back was visible, a two-handed greatsword, too long to be worn at his side. That's Ilyn Payne, of course. "The king has gone hunting, but I know he would be pleased to see you when he returns," the queen was saying to the two knights who knelt before her. But Sansa could not take her eyes off the third man. He seemed to feel the weight of her gaze. Slowly he turned his head. Lady growled. A terror as overwhelming as anything Sansa had ever felt filled her suddenly. She stepped back and bumped into someone. Strong hands grasped her by the shoulders, and for a moment Sansa thought it was her father. When he turned, it was the burned face of Sandor Clegane, looking down at her, his mouth twisted in a terrible mockery of a smile. "You're shaking, girl," he said, his voice rasping. "Do I frighten you so much?" He did. Now we have the beautiful men contrasted with the ugly men. Ilan Payne and the Hound contrasted with Renly and Barristan. He did. He had since the first he did and had since she had first laid eyes on the ruin that fire had made of his face. Though it seemed to her now that it was not that he was not half so terrifying as the other. Still, Sansa wretched away from him. The Hound laughed, and Lady moved between them, rumbling a warning. Sansa dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the wolf. They were all gathered around, gaping. She could feel their eyes on her. And here and there, she heard muttered comments and titters of laughter. So this wolf is actually making quite a scene, getting between her and Sandor. It's sensing that's the thing is, Clegane didn't actually do anything. Okay. Sansa looked at Ilan Payne, felt scared, walked backwards, and bumped into Sandor. Then she turns around, and the wolf gets between Sandor and her and starts growling at him, making this huge scene. Okay. Sandor doesn't do anything. But because of the telepathic link, Lady is like, "Grrr." "A wolf," a man said, and someone else said, "7 hells, that's a direwolf." And the first man said, "What's it doing in camp?" And the Hound's rasping voice replied, "The Stark used them for wet nurses." And Sansa realized that the two stranger knights were looking down on her and Lady, swords in hand. And then she was frightened again and ashamed. Tears filled her eyes. She heard the queen say, "Joffrey, go to her." And the prince was there. "Leave her alone," Joffrey said. He stood over her, beautiful in blue and wool and black leather, his golden curls shining in the sun like a crown. He gave her his hand, drew her to her feet. "What is it, sweet lady? Are you afraid? No one will hurt you. Put away your swords, all of you. The wolf is her little pet, that's all." He looked at Sandor Clegane. "And you, dog, away with you. You're scaring my betrothed." Again, so the Hound literally does fucking nothing here, okay? He's standing there. She bumps into him. Then the wolf gets angry, starts making a scene. Renly and Barristan pull out their swords because they're like, "Oh my God, a wolf." And they're like, what are you guys doing? Are you scared? Let me protect you. Like, what? It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous scene. I mean, Lady has caused a scene, essentially. And everybody's like, why is this wild beast here? The Hound, ever faithful, bowed and slid away quietly through the press. Sansa struggled to steady herself. She felt like such a fool. She was a Stark of Winterfell, a noble lady, and someday she would be queen. It was not him, my sweet prince, she tried to explain. It was the other one. The two stranger knights exchanged a look. "Pain?" chuckled the young man in green armor. The older man in white spoke to Sansa gently. "Oft-times Sir Ilan frightens me as well, sweet lady. He has a fearsome aspect. As well he should." The queen had descended from the wheelhouse. The spectators parted away for her. "If the wicked do not fear the king's justice, you have put the wrong man in the office." Sansa finally found her words. "Then surely you have chosen the right one, your grace," she said, and a gale of laughter erupted all around her. "Well spoken, child," said the old man in white. "As befits the daughter of Eddard Stark. It's like, I mean, keep in mind, Ilan is standing right there. And she's like, "Oh, were you scared of the Hound?" "No, I was scared of Ilan Payne." "Well, yes." Barristan's like, "Ilan Payne scares me too." And Cersei says, "Yeah, that's why we made him the king's justice, because he was freaking scary." And Sansa's like, "Yeah, you chose the right one." And then Barristan's like, "Well spoken." Like, poor fucking Ilan Payne. Like, everybody is just sitting there. like telling him, like everybody, this guy is fucking weird and scary looking. I agree too. I agree. Well spoken. Like poor Ilyn Payne. Oh, I'm honored to know you. However, irregular the manner of our meeting. I am Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard. He bowed. Sansa knew that name, and now the courtesies that Septon Mordain had taught her over the years came back to her. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. I'm surprised she didn't hear it from Old Man. I mean, they're all sitting around the hearth, she said, and conciliator to Robert our King and to Aerys Targaryen before him. The honor is mine, good knight. Even in the far north, the singers praise the deeds of Barristan the Bold. Yeah, it's funny that he says like consider he was counselor of Robert the King and to Aerys Targaryen before him. Obviously, this is just to give us background. It's a little weird that he would even mention that, considering that Aerys was the enemy. But you know, we're getting some backstory. The honor is mine, good knight. Even in the north, the singers praise the deeds of Barristan the Bold. The Green Knight laughed at him. Barristan the Old, you mean? Don't flatter him too sweetly, child. He thinks over much of himself already. He smiled at her. Now, wolf girl, if you put a name to me as well, then I must concede that you are truly our hand's daughter. Joffrey stiffened beside her. Have a care how you address my betrothed. I can answer, Sansa said quickly. That is, pretty bold of Joffrey, saying that his uncle, Renly, is not allowed to even speak to Sansa. Have care how you address my betrothed, because he calls her Hand's daughter instead of, he calls a wolf girl instead of my lady and things like that. But still, it's Renly. I mean, it's his uncle. I can answer, Sansa said quickly to quell the prince's anger. She smiled at the Green Knight. Your helmet bears golden antlers, my lord. The stag is the sigil of the royal house. King Robert has 2 brothers. By your extreme youth, you can only be Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, and counselor to the king. And so I name you. Sir Barristan chuckled. By his extreme youth, he can only be a prancing jackanapes. And so I name him. There was general laughter, led by Lord Renly himself. The tension of a few moments ago was gone, and Sansa was beginning to feel comfortable, until Ilyn Payne shouldered 2 men aside and stood before her, unsmiling. He did not say a word. Lady bared her teeth and began to growl, a low rumble of menace. But this time Sansa silenced the wolf with a gentle hand. I'm sorry I offended you, Sir Ilyn, she said. She waited for an answer, but none came. As headsman looked at her, his pale, colorless eyes seemed to strip the clothes away from her, and then the skin, leaving her soul naked before him. Still silent, he turned and walked away. Yes, I mean, I guess he was trying to introduce himself or something, and then, but yeah, all he does is, what do you do when somebody takes your tongue out? Like all you can do, and everybody's just making fun of the guy. Sansa did not understand. She looked at her prince. Did I say something wrong, your grace? Why will he not speak to me? Sir Ilyn has not been feeling talkative these past 14 years, Lord Renly commented with a sly smile. Joffrey gave his uncle a look of pure loathing, then took Sansa in his own. Aerys Targaryen had his tongue ripped out with hot pincers. He speaks most eloquently with the sword, however, the queen said, and his devotion to our realm is unquestioned. Then she smiled graciously and said, Sansa, the good counselors and I must speak together until the king returns with your father. I fear we have to postpone your day with Myrcella. Please give your sweet sister my apologies. Joffrey, perhaps you would be so kind to entertain our guests today. So something has happened with that Barristan and Renly need to talk to the queen about. Let's see, how far are we? about 55 minutes. I guess we've got quite a bit more of this chapter. Well, yeah, a bit more of this chapter. So let's take a break and we'll come back. Okay. Okay, let's quickly finish up Sansa. When we last left Sansa, she was supposed to spend the day with Myrcella and Cersei. She was really looking forward to spending the day with a princess and a queen. But Renly and Barristan show up, and so for some reason, Cersei needs to spend the rest of the day speaking with Renly and Barristan, supposedly about something important. We never find out what that is. So it may be that Cersei was just looking for an excuse, or that she much preferred Renly and Barristan's company to Sansa's, or something like that. It seems a bit weird that that specific crew, hanging out and spending the day chatting, Renly, Cersei, and Barristan, but nonetheless, it happened. It's clearly a plot device to make it so that Sansa spends the day with Joffrey. But he says, Sansa, the good counselors, and I must speak together until the king returns with your father. I fear we shall have to postpone our day with Myrcella. Please give your sweet sister my apologies. Joffrey, perhaps you'd be so kind as to entertain our guests today. It would be my pleasure, mother, Joffrey said very formally. He took her by the arm and led her away from the wheelhouse, and Sansa's spirits took flight. A whole day with her prince. She gazed at Joffrey worshipfully. He was so gallant, she thought, the way he had rescued her from Sir Ilyn and the Hound. Why, it was almost like the songs, like the time Serwyn of the Mirror Shield saved Princess Darissa from the giants, or Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight championing Queen Nerys' honor against evil Sir Morgul's slanders. Yeah, and here again we have this appearance of Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, who is now he's saving clearly a something that's Princess Darissa. She sounds like a Targaryen, and earlier they said Serwyn of the Mirror Shield was a Kingsguard, but later this is retconned as Serwyn is in the Age of Heroes, and he's fighting giants and things like this. So, but this is very important again, that Sansa is a fangirl. She is what George is criticizing about fantasy. She believes that she knows nothing about Joffrey, but she believes Joffrey and Cersei are good because they are a prince and a queen. That authority makes someone good. And that, it's a very dangerous idea that many people still have today, that for some reason they look up to the leaders of the state as with knowing nothing really about them, and assume that they're great people and that they ought to be ruling and things like this. And it's of course, at least in America we live in democracy and such, but here, this dangerous concept that these kings and queens who have no right to be ruling other than the supposed divine right, and they're inherently good for some reason and ought to be ruling. And of course, we come across, this is a criticism of Lord of the Rings and all sorts of things, and the King Arthur and all this sort of, classic fantasy. Sansa is into it. She believes it. She believes Joffrey is good because he's a prince. And we even say it still in English. If somebody's being, quite sweet and nice, you say, oh, the person's a prince. Or that princesses should be treated well and things like that. It's very, very odd. Stuck in our ideas still, that we all have a little bit of Sansa. But Sansa, this next transition, Sansa's going to have this entire world shattered. Because she's going to find out what Joffrey is, but, she'll be in denial. The touch of Joffrey's hand on her sleeve made her heart beat faster. What would you like to do? Be with you, Sansa thought. But she said, whatever you'd like to do, my prince. Joffrey reflected a moment. We could go riding. Oh, I love riding, Sansa said. Actually, she she didn't like riding because it made her smell like a horse, and Arya's the one that liked riding. But Joffrey glanced back at Lady, who was following at their heels. Your wolf is liable to frighten the horses, and my dog seems to frighten you. And my dog seems to frighten you. Let us leave them both behind and set off on our own. What do you say? Oh. Sansa hesitated. If you like, she said uncertainly. I suppose I could tie Lady up. She did not quite understand, though. I didn't know you had a dog. And of course, he's talking about the hound. Joffrey laughed. He's my mother's dog, in truth. She has set him to guard me, and so he does. You mean the hound, she said. She wanted to hit herself for being so slow. Her prince would never love her if she seemed stupid. Is it safe to leave him behind? Prince Joffrey looked annoyed, as if she would even ask. Have no fear, lady. I'm almost a man grown, and I don't fight with wood like your brothers. All I need is this. This is a reference back to the wood like your brothers. Joffrey wanted to fight with live steel against Robb, and this is still like irking him. It's been it's been a while. It's been weeks, I imagine. All he did is this. He drew his sword and showed it to her. A long sword, adroitly shrunken to suit a boy of 12, gleaming blue steel, castle forged and double-edged with a leather grip and a lion's head pummel in gold. Sansa exclaimed over it admiringly, and Joffrey looked pleased. I call it lion's tooth, he said. Of course, this is, I mean, again, I talk about this a lot in A Game of Thrones, and especially in the Sansa chapters, dicks are swords and swords are dicks. So, like, Joffrey is essentially saying, like, oh, I'm a real man, here's my sword. You don't have to fear me. Of course, this is also all going to be turned on its head. And so they left her dire wolf and the bodyguard behind them while they ranged east along the north bank of the Trident with no company save Lion's Tooth. Quite bold, really. I'm surprised. I'm surprised that the Hound allowed this to happen. I'm surprised that guards allowed this to happen. I'm surprised that the people bridling their horses let this happen. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to happen to make this happen, right? Cersei needs to have a conversation with Barristan and Renly that cancels their day. But here it is, a prince, these highborn going off on their own into the wilderness. Okay. It was a glorious day, a magical day. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of flowers, and the woods here had a gentle beauty that Sansa had never seen in the north. Prince Joffrey's mount was a blood bay courser, swift as the wind, and he rode it with reckless abandon, so fast that Sansa was hard-pressed to keep up on her mare. It was a day for adventures. They explored the caves by the riverbank and tracked a shadow cat to its lair. And when they grew hungry, Joffrey found a holdfast by its smoke and told them to fetch food and wine for their prince and his lady. So they're not even alone out here. They're like going around, and there's small folk and I imagine brigands and all sorts of things out here. It's amazing that everybody let this happen. Almost unbelievable. They dined on trout fresh from the river, and Sansa drank more wine than she'd ever drunk before. He just found these random people and ordered them to make them fish. My father only lets us have one cup, and only at feast, she confessed to her prince. My betrothed can drink as much as she wants, Joffrey said, refilling her cup. They went more slowly after they had eaten. Joffrey sang for her as they rode, his voice high and sweet and pure. Sansa was a little dizzy from the wine. Shouldn't we be starting back, she asked. Soon, Joffrey said. The battleground is right up ahead, where the river bends. That was where my father killed Rhaegar Targaryen, He smashed his chest, crunch, right through the armor. Joffrey swung an imaginary warhammer to show her how it was done. Then my Uncle Jaime killed old Aerys, and my father was king. What's that sound? Sansa heard it too, floating through the woods. A kind of wooden clattering, snack, snack, snack. Maybe that's smack, smack, smack. I don't know, she said. It made her nervous, though. Joffrey, let's go back. I want to see what it is. Joffrey turned his horse in the direction of the sounds, and Sansa had no choice but to follow. The noises grew louder and more distinct, the clack of wood on wood. And as they grew closer, they heard heavy breathing as well, and now and then a grunt. Someone's there, Sansa said anxiously. She found herself thinking of Lady, wishing the direwolf was with her. You're safe with me. Joffrey drew his lion tooth from its sheath. The sound of steel on leather made her tremble. This way, he said, riding through a stand of trees. Beyond, in the clearing overlooking the river, they came upon a boy and a girl playing at knights. Their swords were wooden sticks, broom handles from the look of them, and they were rushing across the grass, swinging at each other lustily. The boy was years older, a head taller, and much stronger, and he was pressing the attack. The girl, a scrawny thing in soiled leathers, was dodging and managing to get her stick in the way of most of the boy's blows, but not all. When she tried to lunge at them, he caught her stick with his own, slipped it aside, and slid his wood down hard on her fingers. She cried out and lost her weapon. Now yes, Arya supposedly wanted to go find Rhaegar's rubies, and Joffrey wants to show Sansa the place where Rhaegar was killed, and so I suppose they should be running into each other in the same location, but they do ride for a long time and then have lunch and then ride. It's amazing that they actually do kind of run into each other just on the timeline wise and knowing exactly where, like the exact spot where Rhaegar and Robert fought and things like this. Surprising that they ran into each other, or that Arya is interrupted by them. Prince Joffrey laughed. The boy looked around, wide-eyed and startled, and dropped his stick in the grass. The girl glared at him, sucking on her knuckles and to take the sting out, and Sansa was horrified. Arya? She called out incredulously. Go away, Arya shouted back at them, angry tears in her eyes. What are you doing here? Leave us alone. Joffrey glanced from Arya to Sansa and back again. Your sister? She nodded, blushing. Joffrey examined the boy, an ungainly lad with a coarse, freckled face and thick red hair. And who are you, boy? He asked in a commanding tone that took no notice of the fact that the other was a year his senior. So Micah is pretty old here. I guess he's about 14 or so. If he's a year older than Joffrey. Micah, the boy muttered. He recognized the prince and averted his eyes. My lord. He's the butcher's boy, Sansa said. He's my friend, Arya said sharply. You leave him alone. A butcher's boy who wants to be a knight, is it? Joffrey swung down from his mount, sword in hand. Pick up your sword, butcher's boy, he said, his eyes bright with amusement. Let us see how good you are. Micah stood there, frozen with fear. Joffrey walked toward him. Go on, pick it up. Or do you only fight little girls? She asked me to, my lord, Micah said. She asked me to. Sansa had only to glance at Arya to see the flush on her sister's face, to know the boy was telling the truth. But Joffrey was in the new mood to listen. The wine had made him wild. Are you going to pick up your sword? Micah shook his head. It's only a stick, my lord. It's not no sword. It's only a stick. It's interesting that Micah is hanging out with Arya when there actually is a pretty big age difference between them. But, I guess maybe he feels obligated because Arya is highborn. And you're only a butcher's boy, no knight. Joffrey lifted the lion's tooth and laid the point on Micah's cheek below his eye, and the butcher's boy stood trembling. That was my lady's sister that you were hitting. Do you know that? A bright bud of blood blossomed where his sword pressed into Micah's flesh, and a slow red line trickled down the boy's cheek. Stop it, Arya screamed. She grabbed up her fallen stick. Sansa was afraid. Arya, you stay out of this. Now, of course, again, in A Game of Thrones and in these early chapters, there's a big focus on the difference between highborn and lowborn. This becomes less of the story later on, but again, this is clearly the privileged abusing the not so privileged. Micah is not allowed to. He is outside of his station here, like training, trying to be a knight, training with a woman, training with a highborn, and so he is being punished for being out of line here. And keep in mind, this is all within Sansa's story, right? Sansa's story that the highborn should be ruling, and that they are inherently good, and that this is the structure and system that ought to be in place. And we can kind of see that no, it shouldn't. That there's nothing good about Joffrey, and there's nothing like inherently right about feudalism, or a king being king. Like, he has no right to rule over everyone. I won't hurt you. I won't hurt him much, Prince Joffrey told Arya, never taking his eyes off the butcher's boy. Arya went for him. Sansa slid off her mare, but she was too slow. Arya swung with both hands. There was a loud crack as the wood split against the back of the prince's head. And then everything happened all at once before Sansa's horrified eyes. Joffrey staggered and whirled around, roaring curses. Micah ran for the trees as fast as his legs would take him. Arya swung at the prince again, but this time Joffrey caught the blow with lion's tooth and sent her broken stick flying from her hands. The back of his head was all bloody, and his eyes were on fire. Sansa was shrieking, "No, stop it, both of you, you're spoiling it!" But no one was listening. Arya scooped up a rock and hurled it at Joffrey's head. She hit his horse instead, and the blood bay reared and went galloping off after Micah. "Stop it! Don't! Stop it!" Sansa screamed. Joffrey slashed at Arya with his sword, screaming obscenities, terrible words, filthy words. Arya darted back, frightened now. But Joffrey followed, hounding her toward the woods, backing her up against the tree. Sansa didn't know what to do. She watched helplessly, almost blind from her tears. Then a gray blur flashed past her, and suddenly Nymeria was there, leaping, jaws closing around Joffrey's sword arm. The steel fell from his fingers as the wolf knocked him off his feet, and they rolled in the grass, the wolf snarling and ripping at him, the prince shrieking in pain. "Get it off!" he screamed. "Get it off!" Now, it's funny because Joffrey is later mocked by Renly for being disarmed by a girl, and the show kind of leans into this, that this is, but keep in mind that, like, Arya clearly sucker hits Joffrey. He's not expecting it. He gets a whack to the back of the head so hard that he is bleeding from his head, and then a freaking giant wolf fully mauls him. In the show, it's like one little bite and things like this and stuff. But no, keep in mind, Joffrey's sword skill is on par with Robb's. And I think that the show distorts this a bit because they wanted to make Joffrey look more like a whiny character. But there's real danger here. Real danger that he was going to kill Arya. He's a talented swordsman, or at least as talented as Robb. For his age, they're no knight, but they're on their way. He essentially gets hit in the back of the head with a stick until he bleeds, and then gets mauled by a wolf. And that's what happened. But he later gets mocked about this. Arya's voice cracked like whip. "Nymeria!" The direwolf let go of Joffrey and moved to Arya's side. The prince lay in the grass, whimpering, cradling his mangled arm. The wolf mangles him. It's not just like a random little bite. His shirt was soaked in blood. Arya said, "She didn't hurt you much." She picked up a lion's tooth where it had fallen and stood over him, holding the sword with both hands. Joffrey made a scared, whimpery sound as he looked up at her. "No," he said, "don't hurt me. I'll tell my mother." "You leave him alone," Sansa screamed at her sister. Arya whirled and heaved the sword into the air, putting her whole body into the throw. The blue steel flashed in the sun, and the sword spun out over the river. It hit the water and vanished with a splash. Joffrey moaned. Arya ran off to her horse, Numeria lopping at her heels. After that, after they had gone, Sansa went to Prince Joffrey. His eyes were closed in pain, his breath ragged. Sansa knelt beside him. Joffrey, she sobbed. Oh, look what they did. Look what they did. My poor prince, don't be afraid. I'll ride to the holdfast and bring help for you. Tenderly, she reached out and brushed back his soft blonde hair. His eyes snapped open and looked at her, and there was nothing but loathing there, nothing but the vilest contempt. Then go, he spit at her. Don't touch me. So we can see that this, you can kind of step back and say, the statement being made here, Arya, the character that represents, breaking the norms, breaking the gender norms, breaking the class norms. She hangs out with small folk. She hangs out with boys. She acts like a boy. That her wolf, which is a symbol of, named after a feminist queen, like mauls the traditional prince patriarchy kind of situation, symbol of feudalism. And Sansa is horrified because this is her world. Her world is that the prince is good, and it was all gonna be so nice, and this turned everything on its head. And so and then we move on to the Eddard next. So I will see you guys next time.